Ready to make a real impact every day? Join the Active Day Home Care team and help clients maintain their independence in the comfort of their own homes. Make a difference in someone's life as you provide essential daily assistance and protect their health and happiness. Earn up to $20 an hour and enjoy additional perks like optional daily pay, 401k, paid time off, ongoing educational training, and more. Join a team that values care, compassion, and your professional growth. Visit activeday.com to apply.
It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. You can find me at Opperman Investigations and Digital Forensic Consulting. If you reach out to me through my email, oppermaninvestigations@gmail.com. Today we have Jay Ponte. He's the author of the book, Be the Revolution: How Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders Movement Reshaped American Politics. He's just written a little extension of that, kind of giving people a heads up on how to protect their rights and their safety and their freedom if they're attending these new rallies that are out there and marches protesting fascism. You can find Jay Ponte mostly on Blue Sky, but he's on Facebook as well, and Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to meet him in person, it's going to be on a panel, Netroot, in New Orleans, August 7th. Mr. Jay Ponte, are you there?
I am. Thanks for having me on, Ed.
Long intro, right? I almost forgot where you were. Hey, Jay, remind the audience, who is Jay Ponte?
Oh my God, that sounds like an existential question. I didn't know we were going to get that deep and philosophical. Yeah. Let's see. How do I answer that? I am an author. I'm an organizer, and I work at a really sort of interesting intersection of Hollywood entertainment, grassroots political organizing, and sort of policy advocacy. So it's kind of a niche. It's kind of a niche world. Longtime direct action organizer. I got my start organizing throwing punk rock shows in Massachusetts after 9/11, and that's how I got into community organizing. But my leftist organizing really started with Occupy, and that was a really profound moment and an awakening and kind of activation. So, but yeah, since then, mostly I have been involved in climate organizing. I started a movement called #BankExit with Susan Sarandon, and that has, in 2016, that was to encourage people to take their money out of the banks that were funding the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock. And since then, that has grown to continue. It was the first sort of public-facing divestment campaign, and that has continued to grow. And it was the first time really we saw people shutting down banks. So like we would do an action where Jane Fonda would be announcing that she would take her money out of Wells Fargo, and then we'd bring an indigenous-led coalition in and shut down the bank. And so that's the first time really we saw in the public's imagination as a tactic connecting fossil fuels with the big dirty banks who fund them, and asking people to, fight for climate and human rights by, moving their money essentially. So that's the first time. So but since then I've been working on climate, and also in the last couple of years really focused on initiatives to fight fascism. So I think those are the great existential issues of our era, of our humanity's never faced in a time like this. So the climate crisis is an existential crisis for the survival of the human race. And of course, out of that is coming fascism. And, if we don't defeat fascism, there really isn't anything we can do about climate. So, yeah.
Now, what was it that inspired Jay Ponte to go down? That's a rough road. to stand up against the system, to stand up against fascism. What was it that most guys, and they live their life, they want to be greed, they want more, you know what I mean? They want to satisfy their personal lust and their ambition. What about Jay Ponte? What made you go down this lonely road?
Well, I don't think I've ever talked about this publicly, but I spent a number of years. I mean, I come from the rock and roll world. I played in bands, and I sort of was a casualty of that world in some respect. I played with Slash, and I played with a lot of great musicians. Most recently, I got a chance to actually sit in and sing for the Dead Kennedys, which was pretty cool. So I come from that world, but that world really took its toll on me, and I ended up finding a lot of peace in meditation. And so I really, I would say it was around 2005, 2006, I really went full into that. And I went to India, I went to Nepal, and I met with, I tried to find the men on the mountain and the women on the mountain who are, great meditators. But all of these wise people kept saying that humanity was really was going to have to fight for its survival. And of course, I was sort of obliquely aware about climate change and some of these other things, but not really in any meaningful way. But they kept saying that humanity really needed to get its act together and go beyond our division and, fight for its own survival. So I'm like, what do you do with that? Right.
Yeah.
So I started getting into sort of peace movement, anti-war organizing, but it was really at Occupy. And there's a story in the book about this in Occupy LA when they were coming to remove the camps, and I got hit with a baton by a riot cop. And I'll tell you, that for me was a defining moment. That's the moment I knew.
Did I lose you? I hope it's not the internet. Okay. Oh, there you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you now, yeah.
What's the last thing you heard?
You got hit by a cop, and it was a defining moment.
Yeah. So, but it was really in 2011 during Occupy LA. I got jabbed in the ribs with a baton by a riot cop. And boy, that has a way of really shifting your worldview leftward,
yeah.
I would say. So to me, that was the moment I knew for real that the class war was real. And that was definitely a defining moment for me.
So most people, you start out, you're young and you're a rebel, and then you turn your back on the revolution and you go to India to look inward. But you're the reverse, huh?
Well, I mean, I never really planned on this. Yeah. I was always a poor person. I was on EBT card, but at the same time, I think the result of all of that inner work is to realize that humanity is connected. We are all connected. All humans are brothers and sisters, whether you live in New York or Palestine or, Timbuktu. We all are, one human family. And, there's just a very small handful of psychopathic people, confused people who are creating a lot of trouble. So, if it was your brother or sister or however they identified in trouble, you'd want to stand up for them. And, I also found that the more I always loved organizing and being part of community, but it really is such a wonderful medicine for, kind of the dread and anxiety that we feel knowing that society is coming apart at the seams around us. And, there are contingents of humanity who, are putting their foot on the gas for their own greed and power. So there is a wonderful medicine that comes when you are working with groups of people to try to make a difference. So for me, it was just obvious that one of the lessons that we learned in Occupy was just no one was coming to save us. Yeah. There is an illusion put forth by the technocracy, probably around the Clinton time, sometime around the Clinton era after the fall of the Soviet Union, where they started putting out this idea that, well, the technocrats, the highly educated people who went to Harvard, we're the ones who, the consultant class, we're the ones who are going to do government, and our job is just to be consumers and show up to vote once every 2 to 4 years, and that's it. And we've come to understand for sure that has been a very bad theory, right? So it hasn't worked out for us. And so we learned in Occupy was no one was coming to save us, and that our institutions were failing, our leaders were failing. And so who, if not us, who? So that's really it. And then, from the time of Occupy, there has been this incredible growing network of people across the country who have continued to work together. And most people don't know about this because, the corporate media does not report it. And mostly those voices are ignored or silenced.
Yeah, that's I grew up on the Jetsons. Again, I'm 63 years old, a bit older than you, and I grew up on the Jetsons. We were promised flying cars and moving sidewalks, and what we wound up with was that you can rent those scooters on the corner, okay? and like you said, the technocracy there, where they just manipulate us to sell us gadgets and stuff 24 hours a day. You're right, man. If you watch mainstream media, they'll tell you that the Democrats, like Hillary Clinton, are radical left-wing fanatics, right? Like real actual leftists don't even exist. Why don't you describe to people what a real leftist is?
It's so funny. I actually had this exact same conversation with Professor Richard Wolff.
Okay.
When they were calling, when like Larry Kudlow and other right wing shills were calling Kamala a communist and everything.
Yeah.
We're like, we wish she was the monster you said she is.
Yeah.
We wish they were. We wish they were the monsters. But really simply, those terms have been used as terms of abuse. Even in my book, I talk about the word radical itself.
Yeah.
We need to reclaim that word. It comes from the Latin word meaning root. So you think radical, radish is a root vegetable. Mm. So to be a radical just means you're getting to the root of the issues, right? But these have all become terms of abuse. And socialism is a term of abuse. Now, I'm not in particular arguing for socialism, but it's become a term of abuse, especially by the right. And fundamentally, there's a lot of different perspectives and ideologies and opinion on the left. But I think people should know the difference between liberals and leftists, what might be called the leftists. Because the liberals also don't care for leftism, because what we stand for is workers' rights. We stand for a living wage. We stand for getting money out of politics. We believe that everybody deserves health care. And in Europe, these are considered very centrist ideas, but somehow in America, they're viewed as radical, So, I think that we do get to do a better job of controlling the frame and the narrative, because a lot of times we allow ourselves to be branded. The right is very good at, simple, scary language to scare their base, and, sort of playing off a Cold War era red baiting, so that's their model. Somehow it works for them. Of course, they have very sophisticated operations to indoctrinate people. So if you look at people like Peter Thiel, they're, it's very sophisticated how the right-wing media functions and is really in real time radicalizing people, not in a good way, but turning them into extremists, right-wing extremists.
Yeah, and as you were saying before, how they can manipulate us to purchase things. They have us down. They have our everything we're thinking, our motivations. And they can use that same thing that they use to sell us stuff to manipulate us in political opinions and motivations too as well. Now,
it's called cultural hegemony, which is a term that was put forth by Antonio Gramsci, who is an Italian labor organizer. And, there's a reason why the Department of Defense spends hundreds of millions of dollars on the NFL and on Hollywood movies, in particular. If you watch the, Top Gun Maverick, it's basically a propaganda video about justifying attacking nations like Iran, which puts us right in the present. So, there's a reason that they do all these things.
Yeah, and the Department of Defense, they also invest money in Cupcake Wars and American Idol. We've done whole entire shows on this. They have their finger in everything on TV, the Department of Defense and the CIA.
That's right.
So then, Jay Ponte, how do we overcome, how do we resist this? How do we fight back? If they control freaking everything.
Well, good news is I wrote a book about it. Right? So it's probably something that's going to, we could talk for hours about this. So I would say the first step is just to realize that what also is true is there's never been a time in human history where one person had more agency to do the same thing and communicate with a mass audience. And there's an amazing amount of resources. And so basically, one of the things the book talks about repeatedly is how a single individual or small groups of people got together and won, essentially. So we just don't celebrate those enough. We don't talk about it enough. The left, we're constantly reacting to the never-ending dumpster fires, and that, by the way, is a very conscious tactic. In terms of war strategy, to keep us on our back foot, always reacting. That is a long-tested strategy. So that's intentional, to keep us constantly reacting to the barrage. But the book is full of stories where small groups of individuals, like the People for Bernie, for instance, which was a group of Occupy organizers who pushed Bernie to run. And a lot of people don't understand that Bernie would not have run if not for grassroots activists who spent over a year bird dogging him around the country and activating the Occupy network to push him to run as an answer to the war hawk neoliberal candidate that was going to be the presumptive nominee in 2016. So also a group called Divest LA that I was part of. Is a small group of folks with mostly millennials who had no resources, and we were able to beat Wells Fargo and push LA City Council to change the whole request for proposal for banks to earn the business, and also to kick out the big banks that are funding all of those pipelines and immigrant detention centers and whatnot. And then that group went on to create the Public Banking Alliance and pass legislation at the state and local and municipal levels for public banking, which AOC even came out and endorsed. And this was done with people who had never organized before. So I think that what's really important is that people understand that you have so much more power than you think. And you look at you have a platform. You've created a platform. So that's really important. But I hope people also go beyond thinking that just posting to social media is doing activism. You got to show up. You got to get together with other humans to do things in the real world. So, or find a way to drive that action. So I think that's also something we really need to focus on. It's like, how do you combine the independent media with actual concerted strategic action, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it actually does. And I appreciate what you're saying. And I would encourage the audience to go look at my archives for the show called One Man Can Make a Difference, about my investigation into Sarah Palin, which influenced her decision not to run again. And people should really take a look at that. But now you say that, okay, you say, well, we all have now access to these microphones and these podcasts, these stupid podcasts, I hate them, and these YouTube channels and stuff. But the thing is, unless you're elevated, and Roger Stone has this way of artificially elevating these characters on the right, we don't have that on the left, any kind of, even a hint of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, how do we overcome that?
Well, there are digital strategies to get more creative. It's true. They own infrastructure. There are right-wing infrastructure networks like Sinclair Broadcasting, and like they are very sophisticated. You have to understand that these billionaires, the Koch brothers, for instance, they have an entire network of dark money think tanks and consultant groups with highly paid, multiple six-figure people who just sit in war rooms and plan this. And then there's also in the book, there is a what I call the Koch brothers playbook of how they have waged war on climate science. And I also, one thing that I haven't heard this perspective shared, but I put forth the notion that the conspiracy culture that has come out of the right, which has come to define the modern Republican Party, arose out of that swamp of the Koch brothers' war on climate science and objective science. And so they will, there's an entire playbook where they will get outlier scientists. They have people like Rush Limbaugh, or they have right-wing pundits like Charlie Kirk, or who else?
Sean Hannity.
And Sean Hannity. And they put out these talking points.
Yeah.
And they're very disciplined, and they're very good at taking complicated things and turning them into small sound bites. And there are a few examples in the book where the left has done that very effectively, like Occupy. I think it was David Graeber, maybe, who's credited with coming up with the "We Are the 99%."
Right.
If you think about it, it's a really profound reframe for the class war, right? So before Occupy, you couldn't even bring these things up, and it was considered class. People don't realize before Occupy, you couldn't talk about wealth inequality. You would be branded a communist. And I mean, they still try to, but Occupy, that "We Are the 99% instantly reframes and, oh, wait, there's just a really small handful of them who own everything. And there's so many more of us, right? So we do have people power. Or at Standing Rock, instead of us being protesters, I want to say it was Dallas Goldtooth, who's, he was a really central organizer at Standing Rock, but he's gone on to be on shows like Echo on it's a Marvel show, and he's also on a really great show called Reservation Dogs. But he came up with this idea, I believe, called water protectors. We weren't protesting, we were protecting the water, right? So getting better at being able to message for the broad audience, because a lot of times we use very kind of complicated language that only appeals to a small group of people. And I think that's something that we can learn more from the right, is how to get those ideas down to resonate more. I don't know if that makes sense.
You're making sense. Don't worry, man. And also, I'm very proud to say I did one of the first shows on Standing Rock. So before they even had a name for it, we weren't even calling it Standing Rock back then. Okay? So I'm very proud of that too, as well. But you mentioned how Occupy brought out the 99%. And then when Bernie ran, the youngsters out there are no longer afraid of the word socialism, and they have an understanding, a basic understanding. Like, I'd like to see more of an understanding of nationalizing the oil industry, man, and nationalizing the banking industry to have a real, rather than this idea of sort of like welfareism as socialism. You know, hear what I'm saying there?
I do. I mean, I don't know if there's a real way to address the climate emergency without nationalizing fossil fuels. So I mean, personally, I think that it is my personal opinion is that, first off, that even that word socialism is misunderstood, right? We democratic socialism, what people think, I think one of the things that got lost in the 2016 and 2020 election is Bernie allowed himself to be branded a socialist and a democratic socialist. Really, he's a social democrat. And what I mean is an adherent of social democracy, which is the model of Sweden and Scandinavia. So it's still a capitalist system with a strong social safety net. And he really, he's never advocated for the workers to completely own and control the modes of production that I've known.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. So, and democratic socialism, what he's talking about is not actually democratic socialism.
Well, not to interrupt you, but he was saying all the right things. And then my theory was, then we go in there and we organize those kids that could hear him. And
That's right. So what I believe is whatever in your mind, like, so if you talk about socialism, most people will recoil because they've been conditioned to fear that word since the 1917 Bolshevik rebellion.
Right. They think you need to wear a Russian hat and get the hammer and sickle and go out there and cut the wheat. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So since, so it's basically McCarthyism, and that's never stopped. But really, if you think about it, what is it? Would most people agree that workers should have more agency? Yeah. Should workers have share in the profits? Yes. Should workers have health care? Yes. I mean, these are overwhelmingly simple ideas. So I believe that one of the premises I put forth is don't run an ideology. Don't push ideology. Create a vision for people to show how your thinking and your policies are going to change their lives. That's it. Focus on that. Focus on, we believe that the money is there if the billionaires pay their taxes, right? The money is there if we get the money out of politics, or the absurd military spending that we do, like sending billions of dollars to Israel to murder children. I mean, it's, we have the money, but the point is I think people get bogged down and attached to words and ideologies. And instead of organizing around the policies that are going to change people's lives and connecting with thinking more about the people you need to get on board and connecting with them by creating a vision of how these policies can change their life and make our country better.
Right, and the average Trump supporter understands that. They pretty much agree with everything you just said. Stop funding Israel, stop funding these crazy wars, and when no one should have a free ride. And we've somehow allowed this to paint socialists as wanting something for nothing. We want something for free, when actually that's capitalism. When you got some stockholders sitting there making all the money and he doesn't lift a finger to do a day's work. You got the 6 members of the world in the family and they're worked a day in their life. They own half the country's wealth. So,
who's the biggest welfare queens, right?
Elon Musk.
Elon Musk is the biggest welfare queen there is, right?
It's so frustrating.
Right? So he's billions, 14 billion in government contracts. I mean, so we continue to subsidize the 1%, and then they are basically gaslighting us. So that's another thing I say, like, gaslighting is always the tactic of the oppressor. So, I couldn't agree more.
Before the interview, I said to, hey, man, Jay Ponte, what's the most passionate thing you want to talk about in your book, Be the Revolution, How Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders Movement Reshaped American Politics? And you said you had a chapter about QAnon and why the Dems always lose. So tell us about that. Yeah,
so, anybody who maybe is still a little confused about how Trump came to power, I really think that I wrote this book because this is the history that has been ignored, distorted, and most people think that Occupy, failed. Most people think that Bernie Sanders just came out of the free market and went viral because he appealed to unrealistic millennials. This is not true. So it's important that people know this history of the grassroots, especially of the last 12 to 15 years. That's crucial, but it also shows how the Democrats, like the record companies. Remember when Napster came out?
Yeah.
the world had changed, but the record companies tried to fight Napster instead of adapting like iTunes did and like Apple did with iTunes, right? And the record companies still have never to this day recovered. And that's really what the Democratic Party has done. And if you see this this is the inside view of all of those events, from Occupy through 2 Bernie campaigns, Standing Rock. And what happens in times of massive wealth inequality is populism, because, people watch the banksters through their fraud ruin their lives. They lost their homes. They end up homeless. They said that, massive debt. And it was all because of fraud and greed. Mm-hmm. And so what happens is populism, right? So populism goes one of two ways. It either goes FDR, like Bernie, where basically you fight wealth inequality, you address the problems of the, really it's the 0.01%, not the 1%, it's the 0.01%, the small handful of billionaires that are running everything, and corporations, or it goes the way of fascism and Hitler and Mussolini, where you end up, people claim power by scapegoating immigrants and being xenophobic, and they blame our most vulnerable communities for society's ills, and they're able to play on fear and racism, and they capitalize on that. So when the Democratic Party put its foot on the necks of the healthy, progressive, populist movement, which the Democratic Party claims to be a big tent movement, right? A big tent party, but really in practice it wasn't. They they did not let democracy have its day. And the book tells the inside story of how that happened. But what happens as a result of that is people like Trump. This is what enables fascism. But beyond that, the QAnon chapter, I was actually part of a small community of independent citizen journalists who tracked and mapped who was behind QAnon, what were the tactics they used, and then how did that scale to have 23 million people believe in these absolutely outrageous conspiracies, and that those people were weaponized and mobilized to vote for Trump. And that has absolutely come to redefine the Republican Party, which is, pretty much brings us up to date. So I think it's a crucial history people have to understand and to see what we're up against.
Well, who do you think is behind Q then?
Oh, well, we know who that is. So I would encourage people to get the book but it started out with a handful of people on 4chan, and it was a live action role play, like it was a game. So there were on 4chan was
Cicada. You think they think so? That's Cicada stuff.
Cicada 3301. That's right.
Okay,
that's right. So it started as an online game to recruit smart people, and I actually in Occupy, there's a story. You meet somebody that I worked with in Occupy and beyond, who was a central person in that Cicada 3301 and then QAnon. And then basically they saw there were multiple. So there was FBI anon, there was White House Insider anon, there was CIA anon, and there was QAnon, which the premise is someone with Q level access, high nuclear secret level access, was working behind the scenes to create, to drain the swamp and get rid of people. So this was then co-opted by a group of people, and then you can see how they then decentralized and distributed the organizing. And what happened is most people actually weren't on 4chan. Most people got to QAnon through YouTube. And especially, and I go through the early days of the Koch brothers and then Alex Jones and Pizzagate. But also one moment, you mentioned Roger Stone. Roger Stone was definitely a person of interest. There was another right-wing operative named Jerome Corso who worked with Alex Jones. And do you want to tell folks who Jerome Corso is, if you know who he is?
Well, I know who he is. Yeah, he's out there with all that right-wing stuff, Jerome Corso. And then he for a while he wanted to have a paid QAnon whisperer. He was the QAnon whisperer. He's going to decode.
Yeah, that's right.
Q for us.
But he sort of came up. He was the originator of the Swift boats for carry psyop, and then he was behind the Obama birther conspiracy.
Right.
And this was a big moment because basically the Republicans knew that their base was shrinking. The base was getting more progressive, younger, black and brown voters who leaned progressive. And so they couldn't just run on guns and abortion as a wedge issue. They needed to change their tactics. And so what they discovered with Trump and the birther conspiracies was a huge, how do you get, so the Republicans stand for nothing except for how to funnel money to the wealthiest people, right? Like, and the corporations. So how do you, if that is your basic premise, how do you get people to vote for you, right? That's a really big challenge. And what they found is by appealing to conspiracy theories, you have these huge swaths of voters of people who were relatively easy to manipulate. They're in, and I'm not saying all conspiracies are fake. Like do I believe Jeffrey Epstein killed himself? I don't, right? Like, I don't believe that. Do I believe that, Lee Harvey Oswald killed Kennedy? I do not. I don't believe that. So that's not to discredit everything that we might call a conspiracy theory. But the point is, this has become a tactic to mobilize voters who, are easy to manipulate who gravitate towards these things. And so they ran targeted campaigns to enrolled influencers like David Icke, people who, like all these fringe groups, against the reptile people and the globalists and the alien disclosure people and the psyop called Save the Children, right? Where they're like, well, we're just saving children, saving children from, they really got people to believe that John Podesta and Hillary Clinton were part of an evil cabal of people with Tom Hanks and Oprah Winfrey, who were stealing babies to drink their blood for immortality. And that is, I'm not making this up. This is not this is what they believed, right? But yeah, so I'm not sure. I mean, I think we just went on a kind of a wild journey, but I think people need to understand how this was organized and how it's come to redefine the Republican Party.
Now, you just sent me an email, okay, that how people can protect themselves when they're now we're going to be resisting this fascism now, right? Which is a pretty popular. It seems to be we're got the numbers, you know what I mean? People don't want Trump as a fascist dictator. But there are issues when you're attending these rallies and stuff like that and trying to resist the suppression. So you have some kind of tips here for us. So take us through these, how to avoid surveillance and geofence warrants, all that kind of stuff.
Sure. So if you go on Substack, you can look me up, Jay Ponte on Substack, and you can get this for free. I hope people do subscribe. And it is translated into Spanish. There's a Spanish version embedded in it. But yeah, there's a lot of things that go into these protests. Now, my hope is that people also read the book, because my approach to organizing sort of direct actions and protests is a little bit different. I tend to be more from the Abby Hoffman Yes Men school, where
I come out of the hippies.
Yeah, exactly.
I have AJ on the show all the time.
Yeah, so that I'm an acolyte of that. So I've organized, and you can read in the book various protests and actions I've organized, like that are more theatrical, where we threw money at Hillary Clinton's motorcade outside of George Clooney's. And so I hope that we actually evolve on our tactics a little bit more, because Saul Alinsky once said, a tactic that drags on becomes a drag. And there's only so long that, getting out with signs is actually going to, I think this last No Kings was enormously successful, because it really sucked all of the oxygen out of Trump's birthday and made it really just exposed how pathetic it was. But if you are getting out there, these rapid response protests, I would encourage people to read the article, because there's a ton of suggestions. Simple things like understand that police can't make you type in your PIN code, but they can make you use your fingerprint.
Or point that phone at your face. Remove facial recognition from your phones. Thank you.
That's right. That's right. In fact, honestly, it's probably best you don't bring it if you can avoid it.
Yeah.
It's probably best, to leave it at home. But if you absolutely have to take it, definitely remove, the fingerprint option. What else? Things like don't ever pick up a tear gas canister. It's going to be molten hot.
Yeah.
So don't ever pick one up. But there are things that other movements like the umbrella movement in China have done where they, you can use a parking cone, for instance, to mitigate the tear gas. Things like if there is tear gas, some people will say use milk. Don't do that. Just use saline or water. Make sure you, when you get home, make sure you get rid of those clothes right away and try not to touch your face. And also take, just things that you can do to be more careful. Definitely bringing earphones and ear protection is important because they can use things are called LRADs, which can really damage your eardrums. Have a number written on your arm for people who you can call for bail. That kind of thing. Beware of kettling. Don't talk to the police. Don't ever talk to the cops. The only things to say to cops are, am I free to go? If not, am I being detained? If yes, am I under arrest? Say nothing else. I want a lawyer. I do not consent to a search. I really recommend people think twice about physically resisting because that can bring a bunch of other charges. And, it feels good. It feels cool, but, you have to, but, it can bring a bunch of other problems.
Yeah, battery on law enforcement is a felony. You don't want that.
Yeah.
Or even resisting with violence. You don't want that either.
Yeah, exactly. And I really believe that sometimes these things are rapid response. They're mobilizing quickly. They're reacting, and that's fine. But whenever possible, I do believe organizers should organize, nonviolent civil disobedience trainings. So all of those things are really important. There's a ton of different tips, like be wary of how cops will kettle folks, which means they'll use tactics to encircle large numbers of people. So, know where your exits are. There's a ton of different tips and suggestions on this article I wrote on Substack. So,
well, Jay Ponte, let me ask you a question. We just saw recently in Serbia, there was a huge street protest, and the people in charge, the government, had some type of a weapon I've never seen before. It was a silent weapon. We don't know what it was. It's some type of energy weapon where they not only caused people to leave, they to fall down, but to leave the streets. They somehow people were motivated to leave the street onto the sidewalk. Did you see that video?
I think that's probably the LRAD. I think that's the LRAD. That's the LRAD. Long range acoustic device. So that it's painful. It's really, really painful. So I think they were using LRADs. I know that also they've used microwave technology, to cook people. So I think in Serbia it was the LRAD they were using. But yeah, that's why you need I recommend ear protection that can. You need something definitely get those squishy, earbuds, but that's probably not going to be nearly enough because it can cause physical pain. They also use it against pirates, they use those weapons, the Coast Guard and, they use them again to deter pirates as well. So.
Yeah, pirates actually have more rights than humans do. They can't shoot those pirates right off the bat.
Well, tear gas is against the Geneva Conventions, but they can use it on. They can't use tear gas in war, but they can use it on American citizens, which is pretty wild.
Well, also too, the rules of engagement for soldiers, as compared to against an unarmed civilian in New York City, as a whole, loaded too. So, how to avoid surveillance and geofence warrant? So first of all, what is a geofence warrant?
Yeah, so I don't want to get into that's not my it's not my area of expertise, so I don't want to go into that too much. But the main takeaway from that part of it is really like focus on your cell phone and handling any parking tickets, things like that. So in general, so that's the broad thing. I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole. That's geofence warrants. It's like not my area of expertise, but people can read
basically
up on
what that is that after a protest they will capture your face and use facial recognition software now to identify you in the future and issue warrants like they did in January 6th, which I kind of support. I think those guys deserve to be rounded up, to tell you the truth. Clearly it was a coup attempt, with the Hill cops involved.
Yes.
But back in Vegas, though, man, we had guys, especially during like George Floyd and stuff. It was before George Floyd. We had this guy Gomez who was shot by the cops out there. And all of our protests, the people were being followed back to their cars, and they would take down the plates, and then they were being arrested at their homes weeks later. I myself I was protesting Eric Scott, and I got a DUI. I got pulled over a month later for a DUI. Then it was like right on the line. It was like I'm playing there 07. They couldn't let me walk. So how do people avoid that kind of stuff? Or park your car, underground or something? What do you do?
You can park a long ways away, so or taking Uber in is a good suggestion, right? So if you can afford it, just try to park as far away as possible. And I mean, one of the things that I've done is, I'll park a good ways away, and then I'll drive within, 10 minutes or so, but then I'll get a Lyft or an Uber to go to that area where I'm trying to go to.
Gotcha. So now what about, once again, Jay Ponte? Have you suffered any kind of repercussions for your vocal opposition to fascism?
It's been mostly scare tactics for me. Like when we launched the bank exit campaign and with Jane Fonda and Susan Sarandon, that generated, that really scared people. Because we had Susan going on doing major network appearances talking about it. And, when you mess with their money, they don't like it. So that was part of the thinking behind that tactic was, regardless of whether or not the pipeline went through, this is a way we could continue the fight and beyond. And so there's a number of stories in the book where I was, received intimidation. There were intimidation tactics, being followed, things like that. Stuff with my phone. I found devices in my car, there's a Banksy quote. He's got a table book and it says, "You are an acceptable level of threat. And if you aren't, you'll know it." So I don't mean to say this as a way to discourage people or to say that I'm some kind of badass. I'm just an average citizen who I just stuck around long enough to be part of some extraordinary movements with some extraordinary people. But I think the punchline of the book is that anybody can do this, and we all must. This is a time where it is, between climate and the way that Trump and his fascists are absolutely trampling the Constitution and pushing what, we know to be unitary executive theory. This is all I was doing interviews talking about Project 2025, months before it was being popularized in the media, and they're doing what they said they were going to do. And I think people also don't really realize the folks like Peter Thiel and Elon are part of a movement called the Dark Enlightenment. And this is really the most terrifying thing possible. There's a movie called The Mountainhead that just came out that really touches on some of this stuff, but it's grounded. Like Peter Thiel since 2003 has been an acolyte of this guy named Curtis Yarvin, who they really do believe in techno-fascism. These are their words. Yeah. They don't believe in democracy. These are their words. I'm not making this up. It's not rhetoric. They believe in corporate monarchies. They believe that the richest people, the billionaire technologists, are the ones who deserve to run the future. They believe in destroying any form of government and government regulation, which is exactly what Doge was doing. And now Trump is giving Palantir the keys. It's terrifying stuff. So people, this is the time where we just don't have the luxury. Like, people have this idea that someone else is going to do it, and that is not a good assumption, right? This is a time where every single person must find some way to actively get involved in organizing, joining a group, starting an affinity group. There's so many different places that you can connect, but it's really, staying on the sidelines just as an option isn't an option anymore, unless we really want to see, this become Gilead from The Handmaid's Tale. Like, a real, true fascist state is where we're headed fast.
Yeah, extremely fast, because we're watching these ICE characters rounding people up, our friends and our neighbors, our coworkers.
Yeah,
right, and with these masks and stuff.
Yeah,
like
masked hoods, masked goons.
Yes,
using the Gestapo, and this isn't new. Like, Trump was doing this in Portland.
Right.
He did this he was using unmarked vans to nab people off the street in Portland during some of the George Floyd demonstrations. So
yeah, that was like a ragtag group of like federal prison guards and stuff like that, and DEA agents, just like a ragtag groups of thugs, armed thugs, and on streets, in brown shirts. We have these ICE roundups, which are pretty much being resisted, but we have these El Salvadorian prisons and stuff like that. So now, who can we look to that's leading the opposition? The Democrats with their brunches? That's who we're looking to save us from this? Yeah,
I think the book is I am a big believer in the inside-outside strategy. We do need outside mobilization. I do think that the tactics, we need to continue to evolve our tactics, because and I'm not criticizing anyone's particular tactics at all, but I would just encourage people to learn their movement history, that the history of violent tactics in America tends to overwhelmingly lead to more draconian police state. From the propaganda of the deed movement, from the 19th century through the Weather Underground, usually this is used to justify more police state, right? Mm-hmm. So I think we need to have that kind of awareness going into these mobilizations. But who's leading it? I mean, it's extraordinary, ordinary people. Mostly it's community organizers, the people who have no choice, the people who are on the front lines, mostly BIPOC people who are always suffering the worst of it and doing the hard job with no very little money or resources against an overwhelming opposition, highly funded. And, we don't talk about the fact that, why are we having this? Because maybe, I don't know, Geo Group and Core Civic, the folks behind the private prison industry, are making enormous amounts of money off of these detention facilities. I don't know, maybe that's a factor.
It's absolutely a factor. And once all these fellows are deported, our friends and neighbors are deported, they're going to need to fill up those joints with somebody else. And I don't think they have any problem finding people to fill it up. We've been talking to Jay Ponte. Go ahead, Jay. What are you going to say?
Oh, no, I just saying, like, if you're looking for someone to save you, look in the mirror. We are the ones that we are the ones we've been waiting for. And, it's time for all of us to come together and unite. And I'm also a big acolyte of Fred Hampton and his Rainbow Coalition. Mm. I do think that we do stay siloed quite a lot. I think Fred Hampton really had the right idea, where he was building coalitions with unlikely allies. And I think that you cannot extricate the ideas of climate justice and racial justice, economic justice, health justice, undocumented justice. These are all interdependent issues. And I really do believe that there's a lot you can do to change things on a community level. And the path forward is to not just your group specifically, but it's building coalitions across these different issues and movements, and, just expanding the circle to bring in more and more people, share resources, and to do it together. Because too often it's just my little group. And it even happens across the progressive movement. People are constantly in silos and just worried about their own donors. And, there's this kind of parasitic consultant class who just, they're really just focusing on their own jobs. And that's not everybody, but
it's a lot. It's
a lot. It is a big problem.
And just imagine, Fred Hampton was 19 years old. Just imagine if today we had a brilliant 19-year-old kid. A kid, man. What a brilliant man.
Some incredible, there are some incredible kids. There are some incredible young people, that rose up from, and I also, I feel that we could have done a better job helping the students who were doing the occupations in solidarity with Palestine. Like, one of the reasons I put the book out is there's a lot that they experienced that we had already experienced. So I think we need to do a better job of doing trainings and connecting with bridging those generations. And that's one of the reasons I did write this book. It's so there is a living memory and an institutional memory, because these young people coming up don't have the luxury of not learning what worked and what didn't work for us, because we didn't have anyone to teach us either. We had to figure it out as we're going along. And there's no reason we have to keep reinventing the wheel. And this is not to tell them how to do it, but at the very least, if they understand what happened to us, it might help inform the type of tactics and strategies that they use.
Once again, we've been talking to Jay Ponte. The book is Be the Revolution: How Occupy Wall Street and the Bernie Sanders Movement Reshaped American Politics. You can get that book. You go to betherevolution.us. You can find Jay Ponte on Blue Sky, Facebook, Twitter,
Substack,
and Instagram. And Jay, you're going to be at this panel for Netroot in New Orleans, August 7th. Real quick, we only got about 3 minutes. Tell us what's going to be going on there.
Yeah, well, first, I hope if you go to betherevolution.us, you can also download a free chapter. There's a free bonus chapter on why Trump won, and then that is a full autopsy of the 2016 election in great detail. So people can sign up for my Substack there or on Medium. Follow me on Medium. But yeah, we're going to be doing a really cool panel on the 14th Amendment, which is the amendment that broadly we use to protect our rights, especially our most vulnerable communities. And then also on the other side of that, the 14th Amendment, the third article, I helped run a campaign to put out the idea that the 14th Amendment, the third article, could be used to disqualify any elected official who participates in insurrection. So any of those MAGAs who helped aid or gave aid and comfort to or abetted the January 6th insurrection should not be allowed to hold office according to the Constitution. So we'll be having a talk with Attorney General Keith Ellison, undocumented rights organizer Erica Andiola, and Georgia NAACP President Gerald Griggs in New Orleans. And I think they're going to live stream that panel. But if you want to go to Netroots, that's what's going down.
Yeah, and by the way, Trump should not be allowed to hold office because he engaged in insurrection. He was found to have engaged in Colorado Supreme Court. He can't run for office in Colorado. He still can't, unless they turned everything over. But the Colorado Supreme Court said he engaged in insurrection. He's not allowed to run.
I launched a campaign in 2023 early on, where we had a big broadcast with ActTV, and we worked with MoveOn.org on a petition for this thing. And we had Ilhan Omar and Keith Ellison and a lot of great lefty leaders talk about this 14th Amendment. So the goal was to get that idea to go far and wide, and it did get some traction, like you're talking about. But I do think the Democrats absolutely dropped the ball. I can't for the life of me explain why they didn't just run with this idea. I can't for the life of me get my head around it. Other than that, Trump works for them in some ways in terms of kind of gives them their anathema that they can raise money off of without having to actually fight for policies for working people. So
Jay Ponte, we are out of time. Thank you so much. BeTheRevolution.us. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on, Ed.
You too, man. Keep in touch. Good night.